Hey guys, my name is Gabby, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing a book talk for This Is How It Always Is by Laurie Frankel. And I know it's been a really long time since I've done a book talk. This book is very well deserving of a discussion. Like all of my previous book talks, the beginning of this is going to be spoiler free, and I'm just going to be talking about my thoughts about the book and what it's about, and then the end of this video is going to include some spoilery thoughts, but I will warn you well before I jump into those. So if you've never heard of this book and you don't know what it's about, it's a contemporary LGBT fictional story about this family. So the main characters of this book are Rosie and Penn, and they're the mom and dad of these 4 sons. And Rosie is a doctor and Penn is a writer. She gets pregnant with the 5th baby and she desperately wants a girl this time because in Rosie's past, her younger sister died of cancer when she was just a kid, and so she always wanted to name one of her daughters after her sister. Then Claude comes along, who's their 5th son. 5 years down the road, Claude really desires and wants to be a girl. They live in this really small town in Wisconsin that's not the most accepting place in the world of, transgenders, and so after some time they realize that Claude wants to be transgender, like he wants to be a girl. When he starts wearing dresses to school, he starts to grow his hair out really long, so the family decides that they want to try to protect him in any way that they can, so they decide to move to Seattle, which they consider to be one of the more liberal, accepting places of kids like this, which is actually pretty cool because, I live in Washington, so it's kind of nice to hear that Seattle is like one of the more accepting places in the world. So after they move to Seattle, the family decides that they want to try to hide her original identity as a boy. They tell everyone that she's a girl, like she was born a girl, like they're just trying to keep this secret from everyone so that she can feel comfortable in her own skin and not have to feel like she's secretly pretending to be a girl, like that kind of thing. Like they don't want her to feel like she has to try to pretend, so they try to encourage all their kids to not tell anybody about their secret, and it becomes this huge secret, and obviously it eventually blows up in their faces. That's basically what this book is about. This book not only deals with topics like gender dysphoria and how as a society don't really understand gender fluidity and how we're so obsessed with categorizing people as either male or female, and we can't even comprehend somebody that wants to be both or neither. And I just think the discussion in this book is so important, and I feel like this is something that everyone should read just because it really does open your eyes to a lot of things that you probably never considered, or at least I never considered. And I have read books before that followed transgender characters, but for some reason they never really hit me quite as hard as this one does, and maybe this one is because it not only deals with a transgender character and their transition and their process and learning or discovering their identity, but it also deals with the family that surrounds them and the parents that are looking out for them. And this book is just an emotional roller coaster. This book also heavily deals with parenting and the question of how much of a right does a parent have to make these huge life-changing decisions for their kids, whether their kids are transgender or just kids in general. How much of a right does a parent have? It's their responsibility, to make sure their kid is happy. I really, really love books that make me think about things that I didn't think about before, that bring up controversial debates that I never really think about on a daily basis, that I'm wow, that's a really good point. Yeah, how much of a right does a parent have to make these huge decisions for their kid? Or how old does a kid have to be to know that this is right for their life? It is a very thought-provoking book for sure, and it is a very powerful, emotional story about this family. It kind of reminds me of This Is Us in the way that it really tells a really solid family story. But I loved it so much, and I love how Rosie and Penn as parents don't have typical gender norm roles. She's definitely the provider for their family because she's a doctor and she works long hours and she provides for all of their 5 kids, and then he is the writer, he's the stay-at-home dad, he does the cooking and the cleaning, and don't have the typical gender norm things between each other as a couple. So I think that was really inspiring too, to see that. That is it for my spoiler free part of this discussion. If you haven't read it, then please go and consider reading this book. It is really beautiful and well worth your time. If you have read it, then let's talk about some of the spoilery parts of this book that I just really want to talk about. So this is your final warning, spoilers ahead. So one of the first parts about this book that really irked me and got under my skin is when the teachers at the school were trying to act like they were so accepting about Claude deciding that he wanted to be a girl, but then they were also okay, well, if he decides that he wants to be a girl, he has to go all the way. He can't be somewhere in the middle. He has to either commit to being a girl and wearing dresses and growing his hair out long, or he has to commit to being a boy. And, those are the only two boxes he can check. That just really irritated me because it's the school system acts like they're so accepting about all these different identities, but then in reality, they're still, really pissed off if you're not gonna just pick one gender and you have to be a certain way. And they make him use the nurse's bathroom because they don't feel comfortable with him using either the girls or the male's bathroom. God, that one scene when Rosie was in the hospital, they were treating a transgender who was shot for being a transgender, and that was really fucking devastating because she automatically just thought of Poppy. I can't even imagine being put in Rosie's situation in this book, mostly just because of her fear of, sending Poppy out into the world the way she is, and, the fear that she's gonna get hurt or bullied or made fun of for being the way she is, I can't even imagine being in her shoes as a parent. I feel when they moved to Seattle, it was definitely a mistake for them to try to hide Poppy's true identity as Claude, they definitely should have just told people from the beginning. And I understand though why they didn't want to because of the things that they experienced in Wisconsin. I get why they didn't want to tell anyone when they originally moved to Seattle because they were scared, and this was them starting over. But at the same time, trying to keep it a secret from everyone was just toxic and wasn't good because then those scenes happen where Poppy wants to go to her first sleepover and they're trying to tell Poppy you have to change in the separate room, you cannot be in the same room as those little girls when they're changing, and Poppy doesn't really understand why that's a big deal. But I love that one quote, and this is on page 84, when I'm pretty sure this is when they were talking about whether or not they should be letting Poppy dress like a girl in public or, something like that. And he's when was the last time you absolutely knew what was wrong and what should be done to fix it and how to make that happen? And she's as a parent, never. And he's never, not ever, not once. You never know. You only guess. This is how it always is. You have to make these huge decisions on behalf of your kid, this tiny human whose fate and future is entirely in your hands, who trusts you to know what's good and right and then be able to make that happen. You never have enough information. You don't get to see the future. And if you screwed up, if with your incomplete, contradictory information you make the wrong call, well, nothing less than your child's entire future and happiness is at stake. It's impossible, it's heartbreaking, it's maddening, but there's no alternative. And to put it into that perspective, parenting, your child's entire future is at stake if you fuck up as a parent. That is huge. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why parenting scares me so much is because of that. You don't have all the right answers. You're just a human being. You do the best that you can. The whole fairy tale is a running theme throughout this book. And I love how they also compare parenting to a fairy tale. This is on page 178. And they say parent time is like fairy time, but real. It is magic without pixie dust and spells. It defies physics without bending the laws of time and space. It is that truism everyone offers, but no one believes it until after they have children. That time will actually speed, fleet enough to leave you jet-lagged and whiplashed and racing all at once. Your tiny perfect baby nestles in your arms his first afternoon home, and then 10 months later, he's off to his senior year of high school. You give birth to twins so small and alike, they lie mirrored, each with the head in the palm of one hand, but it's only a year before they start looking at colleges. It is so impossible, yet so universally experienced that magic is the only explanation. I love this idea of comparing parenting to magic because time flies so fast when you're a parent and you just see your kids grow up before your eyes. But I also love the discussion in this book too about how much of a right do you have as a parent to make these decisions for your kid, because in this book, Poppy is going to hit puberty and it's going to change her body, and they have this debate throughout this book of whether or not she should be put on hormone blockers to stop puberty, because then the easier thing to do, if she knows in her heart and soul that she wants to be a girl for the rest of her life, it would be so much easier for them to put her on hormone blockers before she starts puberty as a boy, because then the hormone blockers would prevent the puberty from happening, and like some of those things are irreversible, like they said. Like she would grow super tall like a guy, she would grow facial hair, chest hair, her voice would deepen, you know, like all these things. Even like her Adam's apple would come in, you know, and like all these things that boys experience through puberty, you know, she would have to deal with. And so they said if they put her on hormone blockers, they would start her on estrogen young, and then she would just mature into a woman and she wouldn't have to deal with all of those things. And so there's a huge debate though of whether or not it's right for the parent to decide this for a child who's only like 10 years old, because they're like, does that child really know what they want, and do the parents have the right to make that decision for them? Like, I love too though how like the fairy tale aspect is a running theme throughout the story, and how Penn basically wrote this story about the Prince Grumwald and the Princess Stephanie. Just the way that he talked about stories in general, because he's a writer. How Claude was telling him that he rewrote some of the story when he was telling the kids in Thailand, and he's like, it's your story, sweetheart, not just your story to pass on, your story to make up as well. Over time, stories change, they shift, they become something new, but with elements of the original and elements of what's to come. And he was like, oh, like me. And like, ugh, I cried. He's like, one of the things I like best is the magic is so simple, it's painless, it doesn't hurt Cinderella when she turns into a princess, it's easy and it's fast. A wand is waved, some pixie dust is strewn, and presto, perfect princess. The transformation is immediate and complete, and no one looks back. It erases all the pain of her past, and it guarantees her happily ever after going forward. And he's like, and it makes for great stories, but it's not real, it's not possible, I don't even think it's desirable. And he's like, I don't want to erase your past, you were a perfect baby, you were the smartest 3-year-old I ever knew. I don't want to erase your transformation either, you're so special and you're so brave. You proclaiming who you are and being who you want to be in a world that makes that hard is awe-inspiring. I'm so proud of you. Ugh. I was crying. And then I love that moment when like Claude he realized this was what his father had been up to all these years, not entertaining his children but perfecting his world. If you wrote your own characters, they didn't disappoint you like real people did. If you told your own story, you got to pick your ending. Just being yourself never worked, but if you made yourself up, you got to be exactly who you knew yourself to be. I think that my least favorite part of this book had to be where they go to Thailand, where Rosie and Claude go to Thailand, just because it was such a slower section for the end of the book, and because it kind of like came out of nowhere that they were going to go to do that. But I did love the character Kay so much, and all the wisdom that she had to provide for Claude, and just the way that she knew Claude was special. I love that discussion that Rosie and Kay have when she's like at home, like in America, there is no middle way. You're either male or female. There's no in between. You conform or you hide. You conform or you're wrong. If you dress like a girl, then you have to be a girl, all girl, and if any part of you's not, then that's not okay. And then the way that Kay talks about, she's like, not just a middle way between male and female, but a middle way of being, a middle way of living with what is hard and who does not accept you. She's like, all life, you are never finished, you are never done, you never become, always becoming. You know, life has changed, so it is always okay, you are not there yet. There is no before and no after, because change is what life is. You live in the change, in the in-between. Love that. Oh, and then towards the end, when Penn was talking about how his book got published about the prince and the princess, he talked about why the story is so important, but for how it's like not over yet. And he's like, you write it down so others can read it, and then it can grow. You nail it to a moment so it can pass through time. A book is just a foundation, like us. You write it down to build upon. Our love, our magic fairy tale love, is what supports the rest of it. It doesn't mean the kids can't grow, of course it doesn't, but it lays down a place for them to do it from. That's what story's for. And he's like, you know what are better than happy endings? Happy middles. All the happy with none of the finality. All the happy with room enough to grow. What could be better than that? And I love like that final scene at the end of the book when Rosie is just watching her family, you know, like watching the 4 brothers interact with Poppy and them being all adorable. And she's like, these kids, her multitudes, they could grow up, they could move away, they would become new, become changed, become actual adult people in progress, people she wouldn't recognize, people she could not imagine, people remade. They would undergo miracles, they would transform, they would make magic, but they were her story, hers and Penn's, so however wide they wandered, they would always be right here. This book was so fucking cute. I literally want to cry just like rereading that ending. Oh my god. Really enjoyed this book. It was just so powerful and I just cared so much about this freaking family. But yeah, it's been such a long time since I've read a 5-star book that was like gutted me emotionally and that I like highlighted so many passages and just wanted to like reread immediately. Like it's been a really long time since I've read a book like that, and that was definitely this book for me. So I'm so glad I took the time to read this book. Like it ended up being a new all-time favorite for me. So yeah, if you've read this book, let me know your thoughts. And yeah, so thank you guys so much for watching this probably long book talk. I really do appreciate it, and I will see you soon with a new video.